doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.
So I'm going to turn to you, Chris, now, because this is right in the steep of ICC territory and your membership of major corporates as well as small corporates. And you are actually shaping a lot of the policy around e-trade, e-tech, paperless customs. There's a Save Our SMEs initiative. But with that being said, I'd still like you to just share with us your key priority issues. I'm going to give you, again, and also your 2 minutes with the presidents and share your views about, what 5 priority hospitable policies and incentives you feel RegTech investors should be looking for from governments that are seeking their capital to help digitize trade in Africa in support of the African continental free trade area. The floor is yours, Chris.
Thanks very much, Hubert. It's a pleasure to join the panel and have the opportunity to talk to the RegTech community. The answer to your question is simple. It's the fundamentals and reform. Those would be my 2 straightforward answers. And it's interesting listening to the 2 panels today. It very much correlates with conversations I'm having with colleagues in other regions of the world. I think we've got to contextualize all of this in the COVID recovery. What COVID is doing, we already know we have a sort of macro framework around SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, which is fantastic. But what COVID-19 has done is really exposed the trading system for all its flaws and exposed countries in lots of different ways around their inequalities. And we've all been exposed in different ways, whether it's gender inequalities, housing inequalities, trade inequalities, and so on. So what we're not talking about now is coming back on Monday and just starting where we left off when COVID hit us all early in the year. What we're saying now is actually this is an opportunity to redesign the system better so that we're healthier, more resilient, more inclusive, and more sustainable. And one of the areas that's been exposed is around regulatory coherence, policy incoherence, and regulatory incoherence. Systems that are not talking to each other, data that's not traveling between systems, a lack of interoperability, and all of that is making it incredibly difficult to pinpoint solutions, deal with very, very practical issues. And I'm just going to come to a few of those because the world we're looking at in terms of trade is very much around much more mobile global value chains. Global value chains are adapting and evolving very, very quickly, and that's accelerating, particularly around digitization in the COVID recovery as well. So I'm going to locate a little bit on the digitization agenda, following the themes that people are talking about. But really what we're talking about here is highly digitized systems, data flowing, track and trace systems through the ability to track and trace goods at every single point of the transit process, the ability to identify companies legally. These things don't exist today. So, there are technology solutions out there, but they're not widely used. So it's a huge opportunity for the RegTech community to come in and start to fill those gaps because we need to use information better. And trade, you've got to remember, is a very old system. It's very paper-based. There are sort of 4 billion plus documents floating around the system at any one time. To Jason's point around e-signatures, some documents just are not digitized at all. They're still pretty much in the same form that they've been for hundreds of years, like bills of exchange, bills of lading, certificates of origin. Promissory notes haven't really changed for over 1,000 years, except they are on paper rather than stone. But, there's an opportunity to digitize trade documentation. And by doing so, and create the systems that then support the flow of goods, whether it's track and trace, and the ability to follow goods. If we can digitize trade documentation, we can really cut the time, a point that was made on the first panel, from a situation where goods are arriving in ports and then the paperwork is 3 weeks later. That's completely unnecessary. We've got the technology solutions to deal with those issues. There is no technological barrier to that problem. It is purely about political will to get the right policies into place to reform the laws, because most of our legal systems are out of date. Singapore, by the way, is by far and away the market leader in this area in terms of aligning itself to what's called the UNCITRAL model law on transferable records. That's the sort of way forward. And if you want to look at sort of trade deals and trade corridors, the Singapore, New Zealand, Chile deal is the sort of the global benchmark, the gold standard, if you like, in terms of creating digital trade corridors. That's the sort of model that we need to follow. So for governments and regulators to be, looking and examining what is in those trade corridors and how do we mirror that in Africa, because the African, Continental Free Trade Agreement, I think, is an enormous opportunity. It's a wonderful opportunity to really unleash growth right across the 54 countries plus in Africa. You've got the assets of the young youth population. There is already, communities of global leadership around technology. The ingredients are there, but we need the regulatory community and the technological kind of enabler behind it to improve the trading system so that goods and services can flow. So my first point around this is around legal identification needs to be looked at. There are already initiatives in place. Are governments following them? Probably not. Are the fundamentals around internet access in place? Probably not. Looking at the UN delivery in its current kind of pace, we're 50 years off track in the less developed countries of delivering everybody connected to the internet by 2030. 50 years off track. So massive investment is needed in that area in order to then enable the RegTech community. And that goes the similar things around things like data protection rules, competition rules, cybersecurity rules. The frameworks are all out there. They just need to be put into place and enforceable so that we can enable the RegTech market to grow. And in doing so, enable trade to grow overall. So some practical examples there: legal identification, trade documentation, digitizing that across the continent will be transformative. Accelerating, talking about e-commerce negotiations being accelerated, accelerating the implementation of the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement would transform trade. In Nigeria, that's 15% implemented. Compare it to the UK, it's 90+% implemented. And what I would say is, in the sort of COVID environment, there is a terrible danger here that the developed countries, or developed economies, I should say, digitize faster and expose an already unequal playing field where less developed economies are already behind the curve. And if we're not careful, we're going to have that digital divide exposed even further, which raises the question of more inequalities. And we've got to do everything we possibly can to avoid that happening. And RegTech play a key role in that to kind of, take the leap forward and get the continent ready.
Doing business in Africa, you can't afford to be without Africa Investor.